conversations. This is a monthly meeting that we'll be having, and really the purpose is for Black families, Black parents, youth, community members to have a space to do conversations, have learning, and have some relationship building, community building time together, particularly in this context that we're in right now. Racial Justice Now, which is the host of this series, is focusing on education and what we as community members, parents, and youth can do to enhance the experience of our youth in schools. I am very happy to be with Racial Justice Now as the project director, and I will now introduce our panelists. So the first panelist that we'll have today is Tiffany Kelly. And Tiffany, could you say a little bit about yourself, please?
Absolutely. First, let me say thank you to Racial Justice Now for having this forum, this panel assembled. My name is Tiffany Kelly. I reside in Chevy Chase. I'm an anti-poverty advocate, and I am a mother of an MCPS student.
Thank you very much. Amir, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Amir Lumumba. I'm a youth leader for the organization Racial Justice Now, and I am also a student in the MCPS school system.
Thank you, Amir. Dalvin?
Hi, everyone. First off, thank you so much for bringing us all together on this rainy, humid Thursday evening. My name is Dalvin Osario. I am the program manager at the Montgomery County Collaboration Council. I oversee our Children with Intensive Needs program. I'm also a parent of a soon-to-be 2-year-old who is 2 going on 22. But I'm really glad to just be here and be a part of this conversation with you guys. Looking forward to tonight.
Thank you, Dalvin. And Tamar?
Unmute. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Racial Justice, for hosting this. My name is Tamar Ruth, and I am a parent of a senior in high school. And I am also a 25-year veteran of a public school system, half those years as a classroom teacher and the other half as an elementary school administrator.
Thank you for your introductions. And so before we get into our conversation, which will start with our panel, I just again want to share what these meetings are. So we're planning to meet monthly. And today is our first conversation, and we're starting with a conversation around having SROs, school resource officers, in Montgomery County Public Schools. We plan to have these meetings monthly on the 4th Thursday of each month at 7 p.m. We are hoping that we will build attendance, and so please share this, that we're having these meetings with people who you know, particularly African American and Black families that you know who may be interested in having these conversations. This first meeting is going to be recorded, and we will be sharing it, but in the future we will not be recording these meetings so that we can have a sense of safety, privacy, sanctuary to have these conversations without much interference. I think that's the word I'll use, interference. So with that, one other thing, as Hashim mentioned, you can please write any questions you have in the chat, and I'll try to get to them as they come in order. We're going to start with the series of questions that we have already outlined for the panelists, and then we'll get into participant questions and a conversation later on. So, SROs in schools. And so this is a question for all of the panelists. Do you think SROs should be in Montgomery County Public Schools? Why or why not? And please feel free to answer as you wish.
I guess I'll kick us off if that's okay. Yeah. I do not believe that SROs should be in Montgomery County Public Schools. I find myself, and I know that we're kind of at a crossroads, it feels like, as a, to a lot of people as a country in terms of, when you look at the bigger defund police movement, right? But I think what folks should really pay attention to is that this has been a movement for a really, really long time, right? I'm a graduate of New York City public schools, and I went to a high school that had law enforcement present in in our day-to-day stuff. So whenever something would happen with a student, the first call would be to the to the SRO downstairs, right? It wasn't a restorative process where if we did things that were by nature normal child development, that they would be handled in a very restorative way, right? And so here it is. I mean, I graduated high school 18 almost 18 years ago, and here it is, my daughter's 2, and I'm still being forced to have this conversation about what good does the presence of having SROs in our schools really accomplish. And it's something that I wasn't torn about when I was 18. I'm not torn about it now. Police have no presence in an equitable school system, and there is a very distinct difference between MCPS security and armed law enforcement. And I think we need to be very clear about conflating the two. But as it stands, I can't, in good nature, be an equity advocate and support having armed police officers in our schools.
Thank you, Dalvin. Tiffany or Tamar Amir?
Hi, this is Tiffany, everyone. I would definitely like to echo what Dalvin said. The first thing that I would like to say is school resource officers are police officers. They are trained by the police academies. I wouldn't be so firm in my stance if we didn't know as much as we know about adverse childhood experiences, trauma, behavioral issues. I could probably not take such a strong stance if we didn't know those things. Law enforcement are in place to gain control very quickly, to keep order, and to protect property and enforce the law. They are not there to deal with a child that's hungry. They're not there to deal with a child that's in persistent poverty. They're not there to deal with a child that may grow up in a traumatic home. That is not their job. They are not trained for it. We can spend our money on those people that are trained to really help our children. When I was a kid, when I was 10, we got into skirmishes, we got into fights, we talked back. There was never a threat of us going to jail. And unfortunately, it's become a really real threat for Black and brown children. They are being arrested at far greater rates than their white classmates. So something's really wrong with this picture.
Thank you. Tamar Amir, would you like to join in?
I do, but I will go after Amir if he would like to share. I will always give preference to the child on the panel, which I'm very proud of Racial Justice for even having a youth on the panel. I appreciate that. So if Amir doesn't have anything to share, I'll share. Oh, okay.
I agree with everyone, but I also have a point of my own. I feel that police escalate the problem rather than de-escalating the problem. So if a kid is in a fight in a classroom, they'll rather put the kid in the chokehold and make the problem more apparent to the rest of the class instead of taking the kid out, having a conversation with him, and sending him back into the classroom.
Thank you, Amir.
Okay, so in terms of the SRO, when I hear the term SRO, I think support, realignment, opportunity. Because remember, my background is coming from the elementary school perspective. So I remember the wonderful days when we had the DARE program in the elementary schools, and the police officers were, great, and the kids would just be excited to learn about it. You might have a couple kids in the class, would be like, oh my goodness, he was at my house last night, but then we got through that. So in terms of the SRO situation right now, which I'm not sure how relevant it is since we're going to virtual learning, but I would love to see a realignment of the school resource officers. We know at the elementary school level, it is almost impossible to get enough mentors and, positive male role models in the lives of elementary school. So I would love to see a realignment when we do go back to school. I've been at 5 different elementary schools in my almost 30 years in the county, and at every one, it was a struggle to try to get mentors for our boys. So that proactive stance of building relationships and, repairing the harm that had been done to families in generational poverty and trauma. So I'll stop at, I wish we could get DARE back. If we go to in the building instead of virtual, I would love to see SROs go down to elementary school and mentor our kids.
Thank you. So a couple of you mentioned a couple of terms that I'd like to focus on. Restorative justice is one of them. So what are alternatives, do you think, to having SROs in schools, and how does restorative justice play a part into that?
I think I already shared my perspective. I would love to see it be a proactive community building, positive relationship building opportunity proactively instead of trying to repair the harm. And, you know, as Amir said, that the negative trauma that sometimes happens with students at the high school level.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off of that and to tie into what Amir said, because I think he hit the nail on the head, right? I think if we think of, you know, and like I said, I'm a parent of a 2-year-old, right? And I know when we first found out that we were going to have a baby, the one thing that my mom said, and again, you know, Dominican moms, right? Just very much like, listen, it's going to take a village, right? And if it really does take a village to raise our babies, then what are we doing to create healthy villages for our babies, right? And I think that we do our youth a disservice, particularly in Montgomery County, right? Where we're viewed as this bastion of liberal progressiveness, right? But it becomes very hard to rectify that when age-appropriate development is countered with police involvement, particularly for our Black and brown students. So for me, I'd love to see a shift very much into mentoring programs, into, you know, therapeutic services, because restorative justice as a model is not punitive. It's not out to try and hold people accountable for things in the negative sense. What it's meant to do is it's meant to bridge the gap between our students so they build better relationships, more long-term relationships, and so they can develop both emotionally, mentally, and socially with each other, because they develop tangible problem-solving skills. Because I think what we fail to realize is that if we condition our youth now to think that any time a mistake is made, it needs to end with them having a knee on their back, then what's going to happen is those are the youth that we're sending out into the real world. So then when something happens to them, they rationalize it, right? They think that it's normal. Oh, it's okay that somebody called me out of my name. It's okay that somebody disrespected me. And then because you haven't developed a social emotional learning within them, then they react in a way that dubs them a criminal, right? And that's the long-term damage that we see with our young kids, including our young Black boys, right? Who are going out into the communities already being labeled as criminals because they reacted in a way that wasn't penalized the same as a white peer when they did the same behavior. So I'd love to see a shift into much more therapeutic and progressive models. There's a lot of really good models all over the country that are doing a lot of restorative justice work for youth that I think could work here in Montgomery County.
Absolutely. That is wonderful thinking. But one thing that I do want to add in is that moving to harsh discipline serves no one. It definitely does not teach conflict resolution. It does not allow for emotional development. And I think that our schools are going to be the opportune place for that, because you're going to have children that interact with people that are from different backgrounds, cultures, and they need to know what it's like to have conflict resolution ability. They are going to have skirmishes. They come from different places. When we move into discipline so quickly, it really doesn't teach anyone anything.
Thank you. I agree strongly. Amir, do you have anything else to add to this? You started off this conversation, this part of this conversation. Do you have anything else to add?
I would like to add that at my school, we do have SROs, and I feel that SROs, like Ms. Tiffany said, are trained to be cops, and they're trained to enforce the law in the school and keep children in check. And I feel that in an environment like a school that isn't safe, I believe that isn't safe because police have a long history of beating Black and brown children, and across America in a lot of cities, like this one is very diverse. And I feel that for more often like Hispanic kids and Black and brown kids, they might get in trouble for issues that are small and minor, that another kid won't get in trouble for. And I feel that type of racism and social discrimination isn't safe for a school environment.
Thank you for adding that. And keeping in the trend of going off of what you're saying, Amir, I wanted to talk a little bit about this narrative that SROs make schools more safe. And I hear that a lot. I hear that particularly around school shootings. But I think there's an underlying narrative and context that we're talking about too. So what do you think about that? Do SROs make schools safer? I think we heard from Amir that hasn't been the case, and that isn't the case.
When Amir was speaking, it struck me, the words he used were, they are dangerous. Okay. One thing that people may not realize is that in the case of Columbine, Parkland, Virginia Tech, every one of those institutions had law enforcement on campus on the day of the shootings. There is zero evidence that police officers on school campuses make them any safer from mass shootings. That is a fallacy. That is what we like to believe. And we need to remember that making things better for one group typically makes it worse for another group. So we need to consider everyone when we talk about school safety.
Thank you.
I think the other part, I think, and you know, Ms. Tiffany, you hit the nail on the head, but I think the other part, and the word that stood out to me when Amir was talking was they're designed to keep us in check. And I remember, like, and Amir, you know, you're much younger than I am, but one of the things that when I heard that come out of your mouth, when I heard that as a kid, that was definitely we need to make sure they don't do anything they're not supposed to, right? And for me, like, we have to reimagine what safety really means, right? Because I think we've been conditioned, and it's kind of mind-boggling because, again, law enforcement was designed to catch runaway formerly enslaved people. That's what law enforcement was designed for. So somewhere along the lines, there came this paradigm shift where law enforcement was viewed as the only way to keep us safe. And we need to, one, redefine what safety looks like, not just in our schools, but also in our communities, right? Like, if we're really going to break this down into just a school conversation, we need to understand that it's also a community policing conversation too. And what does safety look like? Does it really involve more law enforcement? Does it involve better trained law enforcement? Because that's also the thing too. I can go to LA and it would take me much longer to be a barber than it would for me to become a police officer here in Montgomery County, right? And that's kind of a joke, because if I'm being tasked with keeping people safe, then I should be trained and prepared in a much better fashion than somebody that just has to worry about how to do a shape up or fix my beard, right? It just doesn't make much sense. And in particular to our schools, it's what does a safe school look like? Does it mean that if a kid is being bullied, they have the actual resource within the school to go to? Does it mean that if a parent comes in and, again, is struggling to get anywhere with, you know, an IEP process or whatever, who's that parent going to? Right? Because that makes a parent feel safe. I've taught in schools, I've overseen programs in schools, and I cannot tell you, I have never heard from a parent that they feel safer for their kid because there's somebody with a gun waiting at the front door. I've never heard that. And so I think it's redesigning what safety looks like and redefining what safety looks like for kids like Amir and for the other kids in Montgomery County, because make no mistake, unsafe schools, that's a problem for Black kids, that's a problem for white kids, that's a problem for Hispanic kids, because if we make our schools safer, then every kid will be fine, right? Like that's the ideal that we should strive to, but it's not about making it safe for just one group, like Ms. Tiffany said.
Can I jump in, Carolyn?
Please.
Yes, absolutely delve into everything you said, and I'm glad that you took the conversation to police in the community as well, because that's really where we need to also look at. But I wanted to say, in terms of SROs and the idea of maybe, hopefully, the county will try to be more proactive and funnel those resources to the elementary school, because what happens when you have students that are having behavior challenges for a variety of reasons, whether it's lack of culturally competent instruction or just challenges, at recess and there's not enough supports, or additional challenges. What I'm saying is that at the elementary school level, when we don't have the resources there, basically what we're doing, to reference what Frederick Douglass said, is, build strong children. We're building weak children and allowing behavior issues to continue and grow more difficult. So by the time they get to high school, we are criminalizing those that we didn't build properly. So what I want to say is that, 25 years in the public schools, I have so many good friends that are teachers and teachers at high school, and teachers are scared. We have to look at the whole pictures. Some of the kids are bigger than the teachers, and I am absolutely an advocate for restorative practices, because if we would, build strong children, we wouldn't have to repair the broken adults or high school students. But what I'm saying is teachers are scared, administrators, and I'm here speaking my own personal comments. I'm not representing the school system that I work with. We have to include them in this dialogue as well. And though I am for restorative practices, I just want to share, I know what my teacher friends are telling me. It's scary. It's scary. And shame on us for not putting the resources in early and fixing it. It's a school to prison pipeline, which I'm hoping there's a crack in it. So I hope we take opportunity to end the school to prison pipeline, but I'm not seeing enough big changes to actually see that happening, but I hope we will. I still hope we will.
Thank you. One of the things that y'all made me think of when you're talking is the idea of safety, and whose safety are we talking about and whose safety are we caring about. So one of the conversations or the underlying assumptions that I continuously hear when having this conversation is that Black students are more dangerous than their white peers. And so when we have these conversations, although I've never heard that said outright, it is always the underlying thing, the underlying tone that is motivating these conversations. So what do you think about that? And how do we move forward and move around that if we are talking about a system?
Can I jump in, or does someone else? Because I think safety is fundamental. When we think of our own physical, psychological, mental, spiritual, emotional needs, we need to feel safe. And one of the elements that I bring to this conversation, aside from being a parent of a 17-year-old Black male in the public schools, aside from being a classroom teacher and administrator, and also having international experience, schools overseas, what I bring is a 48 years experience of a child who survived adverse childhood experiences, and a trauma-informed care background. There's a study out, there's an ACE study. I think they have 10 points. My score is 9 out of 10. I'm not supposed to be here right now. Mm-hmm. And I tell you, if I was a Black male, I don't think I would be. You can't come from certain situations. I was privileged because of colorism, being light-skinned, and being female, being a gender. In the public schools, if you're light-skinned, because of white supremacy and racism, you're seen as better. If you're a girl, then they kind of overlook behaviors. So because of those situations, I am here, and I want to speak and say that the trauma-informed care that we need to have moving forward post COVID-19, that everybody's experiencing trauma. However, it impacts our Black children more than ever, and I really want us to look at resources channeled there, because safety is essential. You can't learn if you don't feel safe, and I know that because school was my haven, and that's where I felt safe. And my last comment about this is my biggest concern moving forward in the virtual learning environment is for the families that are already strapped and challenged. How are we expecting them to teach their children when I have friends with masters and PhDs that are tired and done? And then you're asking the single parent who's an essential worker to teach the child. I need to see us have some solutions and focus on that moving forward. Otherwise, we can't talk about being equitable human race. I'll stop.
I'll circle to your question because I think it ties into what Ms. Ruth said. So one, I think this notion that that Black and brown kids are more dangerous. I as a former young Black man, right, who's now older, I find myself still wrestling with that, because And the only part I'll push back on this a little bit, Ms. Ruth, is that constantly we hear from service providers in the county whenever, a young Black girl comes to receive services or whatever the case may be is, they're branded as fast, right? Or they're branded as whatever the case may be, right? And those are words not used to describe the like white young girls. So I will say that I think while there is an insistence on focusing on young Black men, our young Black girls, because of this insistence, do get ignored a lot. Right. And so in turn, if you had put in resources at the elementary level, and even let's go even before the elementary level, if you're putting pre-3K resources in, pre-K resources in, right, as a county, if we were doing that, one, that would allow us to close the learning gap, which is a big issue in our county. And then that allows you to divert more resources into the social emotional learning, because again, you're not spending as many resources on the tail end to fix broken kids, right? To use that quote, because it does. It costs substantially more money to fix a kid on the tail end than it does if we had just provided the resources up front. The other part of it that I think we need to do is, when we're talking about creating these equitable schools, we have schools that are 50 to 60% Black or brown, non-white, and the teacher population is 20 to 30% non-white, right? So all studies show us that our students learn better, right? Black and brown students learn better if they've had a Black or brown teacher in their lives. So even for me, I didn't have my first Black teacher until I was in the 11th grade, right? So through almost my entire time in school, all I had was white male and white female teachers. Now, granted, they were woke, right? And they knew their stuff, but I also knew that I had some that really had no business telling me about my own history, right? So I think that's a part of it too. And I think when we talk about safety, because it has to keep coming back to that, it's our LGBTQ youth feeling safe when they come to school, right? And we're talking about do they have somebody that they've identified in the school that they can connect to on a very cellular level? Because it's not just and it could be something as simple as somebody noticed your sneakers and suddenly now that's the teacher you go to when you're having a bad day. Right? But you're more likely to go to that teacher if they look like you, if they sound like you, and if they have that shared lived experience. Because for me, I remember when I first went into the school that I was working at, I connected with students because I wore Jordans. That was their thing. They were like, oh, look, Mr. O wears sneakers just like I do. And if that's what it takes for you to relate to me, then so be it. Not saying that white teachers don't wear Jordans. But again, there is something to be said for that connectivity with your students. And I think it has to come from that too. So it comes from an earlier investment in resources and a diversifying of who is in our schools. Because I guarantee you, if we had more Black and brown teachers and more Black and brown administrators, the word dangerous would not be used to describe our babies. That would not be the word used to describe them. And that's no shot at any, white educators that we have, because I think some of them have done the work to really understand emerging communities, but there is absolutely a demographic shift that needs to happen in our system to make sure that our students have what they need.
Tiffany or Amir, would you like to add on before we get to some of the questions in the chat?
Couple things.
Mm-hmm.
The first is Black boys and Black girls are not allowed to be children, okay? Little girls are sexualized early. They are seen as being fast when they're just going through puberty. Little boys, once their voice begins to deepen and they get taller, they are then seen as a threat more often than their white peers. Not making this up, there are plenty of studies, go do the work, it's out there. We are not allowed to be children. And I think that is where the fear or this threat comes from, is that we're exhibiting the same behavior, but because of some type of bias or subconscious thinking, we are seen to be far older than we are. Like I said, there are plenty of studies on this. I am going to go back to the police portion. Coming from poverty, coming from a background of trauma, in my community, cops were not coming to say, hi, y'all. Cops were coming to take my cousins to jail, my neighbor to jail, somebody's dad to jail. Don't bring them to my school. I'm not going to see them favorably, because next they're going to be coming to get me. When your background has only been indicative of a negative connotation with law enforcement, why would they then be less of a threat for me as a child at school? I think that's something we need to consider.
Thank you. And Amir, I'm pretty sure you're taller than me now, and I do not consider you a threat. I I've gotten a chance to work with you a little bit. What do you think about that idea? That you as a Black boy you're a threat?
So I'm 5'8". The average height of a man is 5'6", so I'm automatically taller than the average height of a man. So automatically, when I walk into the school, go in the cafeteria for the morning greetings and hellos, I automatically get looks like, wow, he's tall, and automatically people would think I'm threatening. And I believe that even with students and teachers, students automatically believe that a Black kid, because of stereotypes and hey, maybe his mom or dad or uncle went to jail or prison, because of stereotypes, people automatically believe or think that a Black person might be dangerous and a Caucasian person might not, because their family may have a lot of money, it might be in private school. So I think it's all because of stereotypes. I think if we didn't have that type of bubble where people base you off of the color of your skin and prejudgments instead of character and things like that, I think it's all a prejudgment. So
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to get to some of the questions in the chat. So the first question I see is, can we talk about teacher demographics? So I think we've talked a little bit about that. One of the participants has written that 70% of teachers are white females. In many cases have limited or no experience with Black children. Even with that experience, it is based on white supremacist perspective. Some of the conversations that I've been in around education, and particularly in Montgomery County Public Schools, is around this, and noticing that many new teachers are also teachers that are predominantly with our Black and brown kids. And so that presents its own disparity. So can you talk about the demographic of teachers and how that may impact, or how it does impact, a student's learning and interactions between parents and teachers?
Dalvin, did you want to start? I think, okay, because I wanted to actually share about the demographics from a student perspective, and to go back to what Tiffany said about our children don't get an opportunity to be children. As a classroom teacher and a former kindergarten teacher, back in the day when I had my hair relaxed, I can't tell you how many times my little Black girls would come to me and say, "Oh, Miss Ruth, I want my hair like yours." And it would break my heart, and I would say, "You are just as beautiful," but what was I saying if my hair was straight? So aside from just not getting to be kids because of the safety and the fear, because we live in a white supremacist society, they're not even getting to have that self-esteem, that self-identity that Black is beautiful. So they can't play, they can't be kids, they can't love themselves. And that's why I say there's a crack in the pipeline, and we have to readjust the whole system. Of course we need teachers that look like our children. I can't tell you how many times I've walk into even a kindergarten classroom, and the little Black boy sitting on the edge of the carpet because for whatever reason. We know, I'm not going to go into that. So now is the time. We know, what can we do to get more teachers of color, Black teachers in the classroom? Men, do provisional certifications. Don't make us jump through so many different hoops. Like I said, you created broken adults. They don't have access to the education because of what the system has created. So you can't make them have all these degrees now. We need to do things completely different to address the teaching demographics. However, if we're going back to virtual learning, that also needs to open up an opportunity for more teachers of color.
The conversation around virtual learning is one that we'll have next month, because I mean, this is such a critical conversation, and I'm glad that you brought it up in this conversation, because it is, this is critical at this point. It's critical. Thank you. Dalvin?
Yeah, so I think I think Banneker Elementary is a school that has, I think their percentage is like 63% white female teachers. they're a very diverse school. So I mean, I'll use them as an example. I think we need to redefine what it means to recruit teachers of color, and not just teachers of color, but administrators of color too, right? Because I think one of the things that we miss is that we have aspiring teachers who want to be leaders and run their own schools, right? And we need to make it where we're investing in their professional development, because studies show that teachers burn out within the first 3 to 5 years, right? So are we supporting new teachers when they enter the field? Are we assigning mentors to them who know how to navigate complex school systems, right? I remember, I was a Maryland Ed Policy Fellow this past year, and we had somebody from Baltimore City come and talk to us and tell us how she should have been fired within the first year because she was viewed as mouthy, right? Because that's kind of the adjective that was used to describe her. But the reason that they described her as that is because she would always ask questions in meetings, and they thought that she should just kind of know her place the first year, until finally midway through her first year, they assigned her a mentor who was like, ask all the questions you want. You're not going to go and feel comfortable. Like she was almost like her in. She was the person that opened the door for her to be her, right? But she said, she was like, if that had never happened, I would have lost that. And so I think to be creative about how we recruit Black and brown teachers. We have to make it easier for folks to move up. We have to also make it where we're recruiting support staff too, Black and brown support staff. Because again, if we're talking about shifting SROs out of our schools, what are we replacing them with? It's got to be with more social workers, more counselors, more therapists. It's got to be with people that, again, have done this work in the community and know the community very well. But I think that's how you shift it. I think it's got to be a definitive and intentional shift in how we do this work, because I think too often we kind of tinker around the edges and say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and never make that real substantial change that we can make. And I think this is an opportunity to do that.
This is the opportunity, absolutely. And I think we have to be authentic and add that, when we're talking about people of color, you can be of color skin and of a different, psychological mindset as well. So we know in the Black community, all the skin folk aren't your kinfolk, or all your kinfolk. What's the saying? Just be,
all skin folk ain't kinfolk.
Yeah, something like that. So let's also be very, wise, because there are also many amazing teachers that don't have much color. I got a little bit more than them, but that are amazing. There are also excellent white teachers, but that's another conversation.
Tiffany or Amir, do you want to add in?
Yes. So I would just like to say that over the course of my years in school, I haven't had multiple African American teachers until last year when I was in the 6th grade. And I feel that the students, for me, all the way up to 5th grade, it was 60-70% Black in a lot of my schools, and the teachers were mostly Caucasian. And I feel that if Black students also have Black teachers, they can relate to them. And I also feel that, if you can relate to someone, I feel that teachers, okay, I feel that if you can relate to someone, that you can correlate with them, you can understand them, and I feel that that's good to have with a student and teacher type relationship, so students can feel comfortable coming to the teachers and ask them for help on an assignment. And I feel that a lot of times, a lot of my friends in class don't feel comfortable going up to the teacher and asking for help, because they feel that the teacher might just say, go to the problem. And I feel that if you can have a structure, a base, kind of understanding with each other, you can accomplish a lot.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think my first Black teacher was in 7th or 8th grade, and she was my gym teacher, but she was the teacher. She was the person who I spoke with a lot. I went to her for even just casual conversation. Tiffany, do you want to add before we get into the next part?
Just a little something, and this kind of touches on what Tamar says. Culture is important. Culture and race are two different things. And that's one thing we almost never explore. culture can deal with socioeconomics. It could be whether you're from the Caribbean or whatever. Those are things that are almost never explored. As a person that comes from a generational poverty background, I can probably relate a little bit better to a student that also comes from generational poverty. So, you know, when we talk about this, making this thing equitable, really serving children, we need to consider something more than race sometimes.
Thank you for mentioning that. You know, I haven't explicitly mentioned white supremacy culture in this conversation, but not because I don't want to. This is the opportunity to bring it up. I think one of the things that happens in white supremacy culture is we believe that white culture is just the norm. And so it makes us forget that there are different cultures in this country. We have such a diverse cultural background, particularly in Montgomery County, where these things do make a difference. They make a difference. So at this point, I want to open it up to those of you who are on the call who are not panelists. Panelists, you're also free to join in. I want to see if there are any questions that you want to ask the panelists or any comments that you'd like to add or share to this conversation. And feel free to unmute yourself.
Carolyn, can I say one thing about race before we move on?
Absolutely. And we're not finished with race. We'll get back to it.
Okay, one of the most life-changing experiences I have had in terms of race was about 20 years ago at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. It was amazing. It changed my life. Growing up half Black and half white, obviously I had my own race issues to deal with, but this opened my mind to help focus, because around the world there were Dalits, I met the Untouchables, the Roma. I met people that have experienced racism around the world, still based on skin color. That we've got to get out of that dark is bad, dark is divine. But it changed my life because if we can focus around children and loving, because every culture loves their children. If we can focus around that and what is best for our children moving forward in this, you know, the global world has become a little village. You know, we're all experiencing this. And if we can have the new policies Dalvin's talking about to get, you know, teachers of color in the classroom, end police brutality in the community, address gentrification, blow up the prison industrial complex, it's going to be us uniting. And I think the beautiful thing is that we can unite around our children. So World Conference Against Racism, we need another one.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, because I think the part that also sometimes gets missed is the curriculum piece and what our kids are learning in schools, right? Because I think when we talk about culture and we talk about race and we talk about gender, there is no reason that kids are leaving school only knowing about Christopher Columbus but not knowing who Harvey Milk is, or not knowing, you know, who our Native American activists are or anything like that. Because again, like we're teaching our students on stolen land, and that's a very real part of our history in this country and in this county, right? Like there's so it's just the reality of the matter. I think when we talk about undoing these cycles of white supremacy, these binds of white supremacy, the way we undo them is in all facets, like what Ms. Ruth mentioned. It's in policing, it's in education, it's in housing, it's in medicine, right? Because again, we know that Black women are far more likely to die in childbirth than white women, right? So we know that that's a fact, right? So it's taking these strands and removing the cover of white supremacy, and that's how we burn them down to their roots and rebuild a more equitable world in it. Because I think when we're tasking, because one of the things that scares me, and I'll be frank, Ms. Ruth, you said you've raised babies. Ms. Kelly, you're raising a baby now, right? Like my daughter's 2. But if my daughter in 16 years is still having to undo what I'm trying to undo now, right? And what folks that are older than I am, like John Lewis, who have spent their lives undoing the culture of white supremacy, then somehow somebody dropped the ball somewhere, right? Because it should not have taken multiple generations for us to get what's been built on our backs anyway, right? Like this country has been built on our backs, and it's time for us to reap the rewards that we've been owed. And so when we talk about undoing all of this white supremacy stuff, it's everything. It permeates into everything that we do. Our schools, how folks are hired, right? Like if you put a specific name on a resume, you won't get a call back. Like we have to change that as well. So it's definitely one of those things where I'm hopeful, because the old parable about if the wave crashes against the rock 100 times and it's on the 101st time that the rock finally splits, then fine, then we'll do it 101 times. But we Ms. Ruth's right. It's going to take a collective effort. It's not going to take one person. It's not going to take 20 people. But folks have to do this work with the reality of the system that we're trying to undo.
Indeed. You know, one of the things that I think about often is that I'm sure George Floyd, may he rest, did not expect for his life to have changed the world. And you're right, it does take one person. Yeah, so let's get into audience participation. Do you have any questions or do you have any comments that you'd like to make? I see some comments in the chat that I can read, but I'd also like to give the opportunity for y'all to have a conversation. Please, Ms. Moore.
You have to unmute yourself.
Moment now.
Got it.
You know, first thing I wanted to know is what was our focus for today's meeting? Because I'm hearing a lot of different things and I want to wrap my head around a particular item or agenda that I can maybe wrestle with. And then I want to tell Mr. Dalvin, I want to be able to know who he is when I see him on the street and I can't see his face. So I want to see his face. And then Amir, I want to talk to you specifically. So I want you, when you say things, which are wonderful words, I can't always hear them, so I can't address them like I would like to. But Amir, I hear you talk about relationships. Do you know the name of your SRO at school?
Yes.
This is to Amir. You do?
Yes.
Does your school have meetings or any types of gatherings that you all have a chance to have discussions with your SRO and have different kinds of dialogue going on?
No, but in the morning we enter the front door at the school entrance and we walk into the gym, and we talk to the teachers and administrators as a morning gathering.
So you really don't have a relationship with the SROs?
No.
No, okay. Because I heard Ms. Ruth talk about having DARE back in the school. And I'm talking about long ago where having an officer come to talk to our babies was a big deal, and they would get so excited and they would have all these beautiful questions to ask and they just couldn't wait. And then DARE left. You know, we have to start somewhere. So building that relationship with the babies from the little ones. Mr. Dalvin, you're going to have one coming through the system. Wouldn't it be wonderful that your daughter had a relationship with an SRO or any protective person and be able to talk to that person as a human being and knowing they're not there just for me, they're there for the safety of all of us. But it's a relationship they built from the time they were children, that they don't have to walk away or shy away. They can run too. I'm missing that. I'm missing that piece. We took them out of the schools where they make a difference and the children grow up seeing them and having a relationship. Why did we do that? I would like to find an answer to that question. We need to challenge our schools and say, hey, our children, when they get into preschool and Head Start and kindergarten, should see officers as good people, as people that you go to for support and help, not the opposite. And I'm listening to Amir, and Amir doesn't have that relationship. He can't run to that officer, that SRO, and ask for help. Instead, he runs the other way. Why? Why?
Well,
I would like
can I
to
say
speak up.
something? Oh, I'm sorry.
I would definitely, my name is Zakia. I would definitely like to speak up. And I think, you know, we have to be really clear. And I believe that we have different ideas on what safety is. And I don't understand how, in my opinion, I'm a Black woman. I've never viewed the police as safe, ever. And that's because of the experience of people in my family who have dealt with officers. They've just never been, they've been occupying forces in every community that I've lived in. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, in the inner city at the height of the crack epidemic. And then I grew up in the rural South. And so the police as an institution, as it relates specifically to Black people, has always been harmful. So I'm really confused at this idea that we run to them for safety. I'm of the belief that police do not belong in schools. I don't think that they belong in schools for a number of reasons. Number one, when the police is there because of who they are and their authority, they usurp the authority even of the principal. A lot of people don't know that. We really have to get really clear about the power that law enforcement actually has when it comes to dealing with children in schools. There have been districts all over the country who've had MOUs with police officers, and they still commit some very heinous acts when it comes to dealing with young people in schools. And finally, I'll share, and maybe I'll be able to, while I'm on this call, find a link to the research, but there's some new research that's actually going to be released, I believe within the next month or so, that shows the attitudes of police officers when they're in predominantly white schools versus when they're in predominantly schools with children of color, particularly Black and brown. And their attitudes are when they're in predominantly white schools that they're protecting from an outside threat. However, when they're in Black and brown schools, they're protecting individuals, mainly white teachers, from the students. So that's why I asked earlier when somebody said the teachers are scared, we got to interrogate who are they scared of? Maybe there needs to be some research. If you're scared of Black children, perhaps you don't need to be a teacher. And I think this is the conversation that we have to push. We cannot continue to ask Black children and Black people to continue to contort ourselves because people are scared of our skin color. I think that's ridiculous. And I think it's ridiculous that we would want children to be running to police officers, which have historically been threats to Black people, which have historically just dehumanized Black people throughout history. That's not a lie.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Zakia.
I have to 100% agree. I do not believe that they benefit my community. And once again, we're not just talking about Black. You have Blacks that are from the rural South. You have Blacks that are elite. You have Blacks. I mean, there's no monolithic experience, and I 100% agree that they are not here for my safety.
Thank you. I'm going to, Ms. Lowery, you had a question or a comment that you'd like to make, so I want to make sure I get to.
Well, I didn't have a question. I really had a comment, and I just wanted to agree with Zakia. I am not sure how we could teach our children that policemen are our friends and that they're there for our safety when much of what we've seen, certainly recently, has been the contrary. And so I think that, and I don't think policemen go to schools with the idea of being the students' friends. They go there, particularly, I believe, to keep Black and brown children from harming teachers or other people. The other thing that I wanted to say too is that I think that we have to understand that children who there are children who grow up in environments, Black and brown children, who aren't necessarily who have an encounter with police. But that doesn't mean that they don't understand that police are not necessarily their friends. And the last point that I want to make, and it's a question and I think a point, in Montgomery County, I don't believe that there are SROs in every high school. And so I think we have to look at where the SROs are placed and what message does that give us?
Thank you for sharing that. That's something I wanted to share as well. You know, the SROs are not in all public schools, and they're not in all public high schools. And so it's interesting to see where they are. And thank you, Chris. 23 out of 26 high schools have SROs. And excuse me for calling you Chris, since I know you. 23 out of 26 high schools have SROs currently. You know, Montgomery County is in a conversation around removing them. Unfortunately, there was a vote a couple of days ago where our county council decided by majority not to have them removed. And so this is going to continue to be a conversation.
Yeah, and
Ms. Moore.
If I may, I think so. And Ms. Moore, you brought up, you know, that you mentioned my daughter. I think for me, and I'll be frank, I have a childhood best friend. We've been friends since we were 11 years old. We were friends in New York. He moved down here first. I came after, right? And he's a Montgomery County police officer, right? And he's been my best friend for 24 years. However, while Black and brown experience is not monolithic, the one thing that tends to bind us as a community is poor experiences with law enforcement, right?
Right.
Because I think so I think of my daughter who, you know, and Ms. Ruth, you mentioned this, my daughter's fair skinned, right? She has big curly hair, but she's a little bit lighter than my wife and I, but she has big curly hair. And we've been in supermarkets where folks have questioned whether she is mine. So my biggest worry as she grows isn't so much me teaching her that, you know, best friend who's a cop is a good person, right? That's not my biggest fear. My biggest fear is that we're driving and I get pulled over, and because I question why I'm pulled over, somehow I'm perceived as a threat to law enforcement in front of my daughter. My biggest fear is that I get a call from a school one day because my daughter dared ask a question and she was manhandled by law enforcement, because we've seen that happen too, right? And so I would love a world where I could trust police to keep my daughter safe. However, I know that we wouldn't be having this call if that world existed. And I think for me, I've only been a father for 2 years, but there is nothing I love more on this earth than my little girl. But because I love her that much, there's no way that I feel safe with her going out into a world that demonizes her because of the color of her skin. And that world still goes on. My mom came to in the 80s and worked in a battery factory for 27 cents an hour and was treated similar to how I'm afraid my daughter would be treated. And so for me, I think I'm trying to create a world for her where you're right, she doesn't have to worry, right? But I know good and well that the only way I can help create that world is by acknowledging that we're not there yet. And
right, I was just going to say that world does not exist right now.
Right. So I just wanted to say that because I think for me, my biggest fear isn't so much that I'm helping my daughter have a good relationship with law enforcement, because she could do everything right and still get shot. Right. And I don't want to frame it as there's no scenario where I'd be like, yeah, you know what? That was a justified reaction by law enforcement, because I think I've seen it go so many other ways with people that don't look like my daughter or me.
And I'm going to go back again and say, well, first of all, let me say we are mentioning DARE. It was proven that DARE was not an effective deterrent to drugs. So I just want to put that out there first. But secondly, I just want to go back to the point of when it comes to law enforcement and children. Again, law enforcement are there to keep people in compliance, to keep them from breaking the law. Okay, they have no business in a school dealing with a routine disciplinary matter that principals and administrators should be handling. However, they are called more and more to do that. I would love to think that there are great, we all want our children to be surrounded by great people. But at the end of the day, some people are great and some people aren't. And the same goes for law enforcement. So I don't think there should be a catch-all that we want our kids to see the officer as friendly. I want my kid to be able to say that's a good person and that's not one, despite having on a uniform. You know, so these are all things we need to consider.
Can I just wanted to add in terms of research, I mean, I think we all know that you can find research that says and proves anything wrong or right. We've done enough that we know that. My lived experience is that DARE was a wonderful program. So I've also talked to military people and police officers themselves who said the reason specifically DARE was stopped and the research highlighted that it didn't work because it was working. That's another twist, because I did hear that as well, that it was working and that's why they had to make it look like it wasn't working. My experience, my lived experience is that, you know, the relationships positive early, you know, with as many people as our young children can have is a good thing for their development. But, you know, I think the conversation with going into virtual learning is going to be, you know, not as relevant with SROs in the building. I think, you know, we want to get to the bigger issues of police brutality in the community worldwide. I mean, with COVID, we have an opportunity to do big things now. Do big things, not these little tweaks with, you know, SROs and this and that. I think we need to like go big changes. Sorry. I dream big. My classes were always called the dream team.
I really agree with you. I think that because of the unique time that we're in, there really is an opportunity, and we have been forced to have to reassess some things. We are seeing very clearly how certain systems and institutions, I would say most, if not all, are not supporting all of our community. And this is a great time to be able to think about what can we do differently. You know, as the school year begins to start, I believe youth go back to school on August 31st in Montgomery County. What is this going to look like? What is this going to look like virtually? Again, this is something we're going to talk about next month, specifically around what this conversation is with virtual school and different options. And I'm happy that y'all are bringing it up right now, because this is part of a large context. Is there anyone else who is in the audience who would like to make a comment or who has a question?
Hello, I'm Rayshawn. So I work at an all year round school. So for Montgomery County, I work at Arcola Elementary School. So during the day, we work 9:30 to 3:30 every day so far. So we do like 9:30 to 11 English and math, and then in the afternoon it's science and writing. So everything is incorporated all throughout the day, and it's just you just sit in front of the computer all day, and there's a bunch of kids there, and that's how it's been going so far.
How has that been for you as a teacher? Do you feel that your students are getting the care and the support that they need?
Personally, they are getting the care and support that they need through the breakout rooms, because if there's one teacher and there's 14 kids, so if the kids need help, I'm a paraeducator, so I'll go into a breakout room with whoever needs help, and then once the problem is resolved, I'll come back into the main room, and then there's just a lot of switching off and on throughout the day.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, maybe you can go to our Board of Education and make some suggestions. I understand this is not the consistent experience of youth in Montgomery County right now who have had to be online, and so I'm happy that that there is some experience that youth are having, particularly Black youth are having, that is not horrible.
I feel like they did a pretty good job. They supplied us with like a T-Mobile hotspot, which travels everywhere you go, and then they gave you a computer. So they were pretty resourceful with that. But in terms of like the kids, there's a lot of kids in the background that don't have a lot of guidance in the background to tell them to sit down or do this. But at the end of the day, they are at school and they don't have that while they're at school. So it's like, how much can you do through the computer and there's not another adult in the room with them, helping them out? So if someone's playing with their feet or dancing, all I can do is say, sit down, but there's nobody in the background and force them or say, hey, like it's a different kind of energy through the computer rather than through in real life.
Thank you. One more comment before I ask a question that I want to tie some of this back around. So are there any more questions from the audience or any comments before I ask my question, and then we'll get back to the audience?
Yeah, I just want to share very briefly, Brother Jabbar, with Racial Justice Now, the DMV Chapter. We're going to be having these monthly meetings, and so this is just a space that people that look like me, that look like us, that can share our kind of issues with one another, have an opportunity to bring whatever challenges, whatever resources we may have to the table to dialogue in a cooperative effort, make our situation and our circumstances better under the Montgomery County public school systems and the surrounding area. So again, just want to welcome everybody and remind you that this will be a monthly meeting. This is something that we did in Dayton, Ohio for a number of years, that we're a 9-year-old organization, and we're bringing our skill sets home to where I grew up in this DC area. And so again, we will be meeting monthly, and I look forward to building and dialoguing with you. Certainly, usually it will be in person. However, we adapt with the change of times, and we keep it moving. That's our history and our culture. To your point, Sister Tiffany, our culture, we've always had to adapt, as a part of what we've always had to do. And so we are thankful for that in our gene pool. So welcome everybody, wishing you all peace. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you. So I want to pose a question or pose a thought and bring this into the conversation. We have not talked about racism directly. We've talked a little bit around it and some of the effects of it in our education system. But what is this conversation between race or around race and education, particularly for our Black students? How does this play out in our education system?
Carolyn, I would like to say something here. It does appear that when schools are back in session, we are going to have SROs. Point blank, they're not going to be gone. We're going to try our best to get them out. Yes. So if we can't get them out, what can we do to keep them from arresting Black children? What can we do to keep Black children from being so harshly disciplined in our schools? That is the question that's at the forefront of my mind right now. How can we stop that?
Really quickly, you can't. If the police is there, like I said, they have more power than any other person in the school. That's a fact. They have more power even than the principal because of who they are as the cops. The issue is, and we have not talked about this on this call, and I think, maybe we can loop some of this in next month's call, is that who's calling the police? And I think it goes back to Tamar's point in terms of her colleagues who are saying they're scared. We really need to be looking at the data, which is why I asked about teacher demographics. It's not an accident that in Montgomery County, over 50% of the children who are arrested or accosted by the police are Black. And I think that has to be offensive to people. We really should be outraged by that. I mean, we can't not be outraged about that and then say Black Lives Matter in the same breath. Because what's happening is people are really dealing with their own implicit and explicit biases by the socialization that Black is just worse, or Black children are just worse, when we know that that's not the case. Research has said that it plays out if anybody's around children. We know that children misbehave all the time. It's just a part of growing up. However, who's punished for the misbehavior, we know that who it is in terms of all of the data and in terms of family stories as well. So I think that it's going to take some organizing, particularly with educators, and talking to teachers and figuring out, if we're going to get some support from the local teachers union. In Oakland, they were able to get support. They're more progressive, the Oakland Education Association. I'm not sure if that's the case here in Montgomery County. I know certainly in Dayton, and I say this unapologetically, the teacher union and the teachers that we dealt with there were extremely racist and problematic.
So let me ask this. So you brought up a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, Zakia. Dalvin, I'll get to you in a second. there are many things that I have seen. There are many assumptions that I have seen, and very subtle ways that race and racism has played a part in these conversations around education. And I think one of them is that our kids, that Black kids, don't deserve certain things, don't need to feel safe, you know, are not as capable as white students or their other peers. And so this is the nature of my question. What are some of these assumptions? What are some of these things around racism that are driving this conversation that we're having in around SROs and other issues in education? And I want to say them explicitly so that we can have them named and then address them.
Yeah, so, and I, honestly, Carolyn, you hit it on there, because that's actually, I was going to mention this when we were talking about teachers, but I think it actually segues perfectly into your question / thought. When we talk about teacher expectation, right, and there was a study conducted in 2017 where that showed that two teachers, a white teacher and a Black teacher, could have the same student, and the expectations that the Black teacher had for that student would be very different than the expectations that the white teacher had, right? And there's been some studies that have shown that we really shouldn't even call it implicit bias, because that kind of excuses it. It's almost like accidental racism, right? Like, oh, I didn't mean to be racist. And there's been some studies about pushing back on that. But either way, like when we talk about our teachers, what are our teachers expecting from our students, and what do they think our students deserve, right? So when we talk about safe learning environments, and this ties into the conversation for next month, even with virtual learning, right? We know good and well that in Montgomery County in particular, there are some areas that just do not have reliable internet service, right? So, and those areas are predominantly Black and brown areas, right? And so what are we doing as a school system to make sure that the issues that we had at the beginning of the pandemic with some of our students that couldn't get online, that couldn't access their coursework, what are we doing to make sure that this fall that doesn't happen, because this is going to be our normal for the next 5-6 months? Because also, and to Ms. Ruth's point, that's a stressor for teachers too, because imagine you're a teacher, you care about your kids, you're trying to make sure that they're good, but they can't sign on for weeks on end. Now you're starting to worry that something happened to them, right? So I think when we talk about racism, it's not just the overt racism, it's not just the systemic racism that you know corrupts these systems. It's that individual racism too that bleeds through in expectations. And you know, I can't tell you, I remember when I was 7, I had a teacher, Ms. Becker, and I'll never forget her name. I had ran out of crayons to color in my Black History Month project, and so I used the same crayons for the colors, and she dinged me on my grades because I didn't use enough color. And when I went back to tell my mom was like, what? So my mom goes down there and she's like, well, if he can't follow directions, he's never going to be anything. And my mom looked at this lady like she was crazy. And that's a norm for a lot of our kids. That's a norm. That's very normal to hear, like, oh, you know, you should really focus on a trade instead of focusing on going to college, right? Like that's something that our kids hear too when they get to high school. And we have to, one, we have to call it out. 2, we have to make sure that we're creating an environment that's not allowed, right? And I get that we need teachers. I get that we're MCPS constantly says that they're understaffed, but I'd rather have 200 great teachers than 100 great teachers and 200 bad teachers, because the teachers that struggle to undo a lot of this stuff within themselves, their own internal biases, that impacts our babies too. And then, so for example, Ms. Ruth taught in kindergarten, right? Miss Ruth did a great job with Jesse in kindergarten. And then we get to 5th grade and Jesse has a bad teacher that has now undone, an ineffective teacher that has now undone all the progress that Ms. Ruth did when she had Jesse. Then what? Then what happens when we get to high school? And so I think it's realizing that this has to be a 3-pronged approach. We have to stop criminalizing our children, like Chris said in the chat, because I think it's so often. And criminalizing does not just mean law enforcement. Understand that, like, criminalizing means, like, if you come into school and I am treating you like a criminal, I am treating you like lesser than, I am treating you like the expectation for you is less than the expectation for the kid sitting 6 feet away from you, that is me criminalizing and marginalizing you. And the last thing I'll say, I do not like the marginalized community language, and this isn't at you, Sister Zakiya, so it's not, but they didn't come to us marginalized. These are emerging communities, right? They did not come to us marginalized. We did not do anything to make Black and brown students marginalized before they got in your classroom, Miss Ruth, before they got to me in the therapist's office, before they got to you, Miss Moore, where, you know, if you worked with them at any point. That's not our burden to carry as leaders now. It's our burden to undo it. But we continue the criminalization if we continue to place them in a marginalized box, and that's not what they are. They are members of an emerging community, and it's our job to make sure that they can be successful going forward.
Dalvin, you mentioned something that struck with me. You know, I went to a school where I had a great teacher in first grade, great second grade teacher. Third grade was so traumatic, and I even very recently have realized how this teacher has impacted how I think about myself and how I learn, and how I contextualized myself in a school environment. Luckily, I had a great fourth grade teacher, but it really makes an impact. You know, this is I'm not going to say but some 30 some years later, you know, it makes a difference.
And to that point, Carolyn, real quick, because you just said that we carry that with us. I'm 35 and I still remember Ms. Becker's name, and I still remember what she said to my mom, and I still remember those things. And it wasn't until like I got into a classroom, and again, I believe every student can succeed. I refuse to throw in the towel on any kid, on any family. I think everybody can succeed. But I remember thinking to myself, the reason I believe that is because I never wanted to be another kid's Ms. Becker. I never wanted to be the reason that you doubted yourself. So yeah, it sticks with you. It sticks with you long after you're done.
Let me ask you about this, and I want to pose this to all of you, not just the panelists. These experiences that Black kids have in school really impact us, like we said. What about the parents? You know, I know my mother was in school all the time. She had to interfere all the time. I remember even in high school, I went to Kennedy High School. You know, I would round the corner and somebody say, your mom's here again. You know, just a constant responsibility to make sure that I was not harmed and that I was safe and that I was given the attention and the respect that I deserved. So what about for parents? What is this toll on y'all?
I'm glad you mentioned that. As a parent of a child that does have some difficulties in the standard classroom, it's exhausting. Mm-hmm. I am anxious every day waiting mm-hmm. on the call. I wait for the call every single day. It never, ever stops. I don't get a break because I just know this is gonna be the day that someone calls me because he stepped out of line or did something, and it's draining and it's exhausting and I'm tired. Before I lived here in Maryland, I was in Florida. I actually took him out of public school because it was just too much. I couldn't work, I could not function. It is exhausting for a parent. Not only that, most houses where there's a financial struggle are headed by women. So we're the breadwinner, we're the parent, and there's no one else, you know? And there have been times where I'm like, can't you just do the right thing? It's not his fault, you know? So I struggle personally with that every single day, and it is exhausting. And if it was not for having a flexible employer, you know, I wonder if I'd have a job. You know, those are all real risks when you're always getting a call about your child.
Right.
I went through that too. That's the same. You know, Tiffany, our experiences mirror each other because I went through that, you know, with a mirror really early on. And, you know, if it wasn't for a support system or like having, like you said, a flexible job, you know, it's really taxing, you know, on parents. And that's the whole reason why Racial Justice Now was even formed in the beginning. It was to help provide that support system for other parents, particularly Black parents who were facing this kind of overt racism in schools and just trauma that impacts our children and also impacts us as an entire family. So yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
Carolyn, can I share as a parent of a 17-year-old who is much taller than myself and fortunately has had a overall positive experience in the public school system. As a parent, I still have fear, still scary. know in terms of like if a teacher complains about him for a minor issue, is it because he's a Black male? And so you have all those questions that are just uncomfortable, and you fight to try to be fair, and but it's a challenge. And I think just this opportunity of 2020 with, you mentioned, George Floyd and everything else, we have an opportunity to make some real shifts. Because if you've had a child with special needs, or has been in the criminal justice system or in detention centers, or if you have a well-behaved student, Black children are, their needs, educational needs, need to be addressed in a whole different way.
Thank you for sharing that. I strongly agree. I strongly agree. And I see the toll now that my friends have children in school. I see the toll it takes. I've been trying to get together with Tiffany for a while, but we're both so tired. And I know that even while this is a summer break, these are things that are still constantly on my friends' minds, constantly. I want to take a couple of more comments or questions from the audience before we start to wrap up.
Yeah, I've got a question for Zakia. Really, I know you put some resources in the chat, but I'm really concerned that there are many folks in our community who believe the narrative that we need officers in our schools to keep the children safe, and I'm putting air quotes up when I say that. And a lot, to be honest, are elders who have a sense of wanting to have that level of safety, or what they perceive to be a level of safety. And I'm just wondering about how to help folks understand what the data really is saying, because a lot of folks are trying really hard not to see the numbers for what they really are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think this is hard work, right? I think this conversation is hopefully a part of, continuing to share the data and the resources and things like that for people to really come to grips, like you said, not just with the numbers, but just with the sheer history. I think my husband has shared another link. There's a Reclaim to Learn report, and that gives a deep historical overlook for people who don't understand the origins of police in schools. Because I'm all about not just, do this because I say so, but like, I really do believe in providing people with the resources to be able to make an informed decision. Now, if you see all of this data and all of these resources, and there's a video that I encourage everybody to watch when you have some time, because it is really full of not just talking about the problem, but it also talks about solutions and how we can really re-envision what we have been socialized to believe what safety is. We really can, particularly in this moment of COVID, really do something really big in terms of not just getting the police out, but also replacing the philosophy of punitiveness when it comes to children with a philosophy of transformation, with a philosophy of restoration. We've heard a lot about restorative justice. We have to be able to implement transformation and restoration in a way that's a part of our philosophy. It's not a program. So that's going to take like a lot of work in really undoing, if you will, unschooling or programming people to just really believe that Black children are animals. I'm sorry, but there has been a lot of programming over the years that Black people, Black children, Black men, Black boys are savages who need to be controlled. That's what it's about. And so when people can finally admit, even other Black people, right? Even other people of color, when we can finally admit, you know what, I was socialized to believe this. I didn't realize it. But now that we're having this conversation, I can admit that this is something I've been socialized to believe, but I can also say I'm ready to sign up to undo some of that socialization and really see these children as the children that they are. And so I hope that answers your question, but I think it's going to take more of us, everybody on this call, being ambassadors to people in our family, being ambassadors at our churches, being ambassadors at all of our different social events about why we can be using the money that the county is currently spending on SROs to really build out an amazing infrastructure that reimagines what actual safety is. Because I do believe if Black children are safe, if Black families are safe, everybody else will be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Because anti-Blackness is really the fulcrum of white supremacy. That's just historical fact. And so that's why I feel comfortable in saying that once we really center Black children and Black people in this context, everyone else will be safe as well, because with the transformation and the restoration will be for everybody. It just will include Black children who are currently, as you know, disproportionately impacted by the criminalization of police and schools. So I hope that answers your question. But again, I just think it's up to us. I want to just thank everybody who came to this call tonight. I know it's late and everything like that, but I think that the people who came to this call, you care about this issue, you're interested in having this conversation. Just asking that people, continue to make the calls to the school board and the county council, but also talk to the people who may be a little bit trepidatious or trepid about, oh my goodness, if we take the police out of schools, then what will happen? Chaos will not happen, I promise you. Take that money and let's do something that's really transforming. So, but thanks for the question. And I really encourage everybody to take a look at the resources in the chat.
Zakia, thank you so much. We're going to have to wrap up and we can't take any more questions or comments at this time so that we can make sure you all get out on time. But, Zakia is the consummate advocate. I appreciate y'all sharing these resources. So as I'm asking our panelists to close out with some thoughts, please note the resources here. Once the Zoom is finished, then that you can't see the information. So I want to give you all a chance to check out the resources. As you're doing that, I would love for the panelists to say a closing statement, please. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I was going to defer to Amir because Ms. Ruth set that standard, and I feel like deferring to the youth is the way we got to do it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm so glad to be on this panel with you guys. You guys are, without a doubt, activists and just general badasses, and so my hat's off to you. I will leave you with this. I think that we are at an inflection point, not just in our county, but also in our country. Right. And, and I grew up in New York and Amadou Diallo and Abner Louima and, seeing what happened to Rodney King on TV and all these things. Right. And I have never felt more hopeful about change coming than I do now. And it's not just because of the movement that has happened in the wake of George Floyd, but also Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, right? Our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters who, again, are being targeted systemically every day, right? But there's been sustained movement, right? And there's been sustained movement around the common goal that is to make our communities safer and safer through our lens, not through a white supremacist's lens. And that makes it different for me this time. And I think that when we commit ourselves to this fight, the one thing I will urge all of you to do is grant yourself grace, because this is hard and this is not easy work. And we are constantly traumatizing ourselves as we bare our souls to seek justice for those that aren't here to seek it themselves, right? And so I just ask that you give yourself grace, because this is not easy work, and know that just by showing up, you've contributed so much. So thank you guys for having me on, and I look forward to working with you guys as we work to dismantle the system brick by brick, all right?
Thank you, Dalvin. I appreciate your comments. Tiffany, Tamar, Amir.
I'll jump in.
I will go ahead and go. Oh, go on ahead, Tamar. Oh, okay. Well, I just want to say that it's really time for us to reimagine and redefine the experience of our children in public school systems. I will say that the trauma of policing has been building in me since childhood, and it finally came to a head when I gave birth to a little Black boy. These were not concerns I had with my daughters. These were not concerns I had for myself. But as the trends continue in this country, and of me going to juvenile court systems and seeing all Black bodies, it has really begun to cause an unrest within myself. And this is something that I'll continue to fight for as long as I'm able to.
Thank you, Tiffany.
All right, I guess we're going to finish with the words of the youth. So Amir, I hope you're getting your comments ready. First, thank you guys again for hosting this. I just wanted to share that, you know, another element that I bring is that my father was incarcerated. He went through the school to prison pipeline and didn't make it out. And I grew up without a father as a result of that. And so have had various trauma. Aside from the biracial, there's a no father and all that stuff. But one of the things that I have learned is that all I ever needed, and I think all we ever need to move forward, is what we learned in kindergarten. I want to show you guys something. I set this up so you guys could see. You see all these books? Hopefully you can screenshot it and you can see my reading list. There's some good stuff in there. But all these books, and really it comes down to what Dalvin said, grace and, you know, love, mercy, joy. That we need to get back to centering the conversations to move forward around virtues and things of integrity. And I just, you know, and I know I love in kindergarten, we teach, be kind, be nice, listen, you know, just getting back to those basic human values and moving forward with these difficult conversations, because it is hard, like Dalvin said, and we're going to need to make sure we love ourselves, we're authentic, we speak our truth, and respect others.
Thank you, Tamar. And last and certainly not least, Amir.
I just want to say this was a great and powerful session that we had. I'm happy we talked to each other for our collective ideas, and hopefully we can bring some change and stop this school to prison pipeline.
Thank you, Amir, and thank you all for participating. This was a really great conversation. I'm looking forward to having continuous conversations, and I hope the next time, and I'll make sure next time we focus on some solutions and understanding that we also have some strengths in the community that will help us in guiding these conversations and getting to solutions. So thank you all. Please check us out, Racial Justice Now, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are everywhere. And Zakia, make sure that you're informed and you have resources constantly. So if you ever need any resource or there are any questions you have around these topics, check out Racial Justice Now. I'm sure the information is there. We will see you on August 27th. Thank you very much. Have a good night.